Nash. I am the author of House File 3, which will be on the floor later today. Last time we did it, but House File 3 is an effort to, in many ways, get more out of the information that we already are getting from our OLA reports. And in consultation with the OLA, after I devised this bill, we've realized that many of the things that the OLA makes recommendations on are not necessarily being followed up with by the OLA based on time constraints. And the requirements of House File 3 would be that a report is created at the end of every year and sent to ranking members of the committees of jurisdiction for various fundings. What we're hoping to do with House File 3 is to provide a greater amount of information to those that are going to be making funding recommendations and funding appropriations, and give them a greater number of tools to see, have internal controls been met by the organizations and agencies that they have granted that money to. And we'll just use some of the more popular examples. If Feeding Our Future would have been thought more deeply at DHS and Department of Education, what we would have seen is there were internal controls that were lacking, and you can read that in the OLA report. But what we're trying to do, and much like the state of Colorado that has done something very similar to this, is to provide greater information and a greater assessment of internal control compliance with departments and agencies. So as I told you before, this was a bill that was dreamt up on the back of a boat. And I think that what we have seen is there has been more waste, fraud, and abuse in the state of Minnesota than any other state in the country, and this is not the kind of Minnesota exceptionalism that we're trying to get at. So this is a very simple bill. I've spoken to several DFL colleagues that have said that they want to vote for this bill, and I'm hoping that their leadership does not take them off the board, because they recognize that it is time to reduce the propensity for fraud. And that's really what House File 3 would do, is providing greater information, greater view into the process. We will mechanically, by utilization of these tools, suppress the amount of information that about the fraud that is potentially out there. Interestingly enough, in 1993, an OLA report was published that said the amount of information that's going back to chairs and people who make decisions should be increased. And 1993 was quite a while ago, but if you think about that, back in 1993, they said very much the same thing, that there needs to be greater information given to chairs, ranking members, and decision makers. This is something that I think is a very common sense approach, and it is part of our fraud prevention package. It is something that I hope we see Democrats putting up votes for, because I hope that our caucus is not the only one that is against waste, fraud, and abuse. With that, I will have Chair Kristen Robbins come forward and share some of what else is in her bill.
Thanks, Jim. Hi, Representative Kristen Robbins, District 37A, and I have a bill on the floor today that will expand whistleblower protections for state employees. And this is very important. As chair of the Fraud Committee, we have had many people come forward and want to share information with us, and they are in fear of their jobs, their careers, and they are very reticent to come forward and testify publicly, or even to make reports identifying who they are. I've had conversations where people won't tell me their name, and we haven't met in person yet, and we're hoping to get to the point where we meet in person. So people are very afraid to point out what they see as real problems in some of the agencies, and they want protection, and we need to provide that for them so that we can clean this up. The people who work in state government are working really hard, and they see these problems, and they want to fix it. They want to be partners in solving some of the waste, fraud, and abuse that's out there. So the whistleblower protection expands the whistleblower protection by creating new definitions for, originally we had it as waste, fraud, and abuse, but we'll be offering an amendment today that will define fraud and misuse. And that has been a bipartisan effort, working with Chair Pinto, my lead on the Fraud Committee, and Chair Cleavorn, Chair Anderson. So we have, I hope, bipartisan support for this bill. So happy to take questions.
Representative Robbins, go ahead. Could you just briefly talk about the differences between the initial Senate version of the bill and this bill? I know that had bipartisan support initially in the Senate. Did they have that definition for fraud and misuse in there?
So the original bill defined waste, fraud, and abuse, and I want to be clear on this, with language that was passed by the Democrat majority last session when they created an OIG office in the Department of Education. So it is Democrat language that we put in our bill for waste, fraud, and abuse that now they don't care for. So that language is still traveling in the Senate bill, which had bipartisan unanimous support in the committee over there. In our bill, because we're trying to align the definition, with getting bipartisan support for it, but also the new language that's traveling in the Inspector General bill, it will match the language traveling in the Inspector General bill, HF1, for the definition of fraud and the definition of misuse. And we do think that these definitions are better. Chair Pinto and I had a long conversation about that Friday. We think that we're improving the language that was passed by the majority last session. And so I'm hoping that when we get to conference that the Senate will accept our language.
Other than the definition, how does your bill expand on current whistleblower protections that state employees have?
So currently, the law protects unclassified employees, and we're expanding it to all state employees. And then currently, they can find protection when they report to a constitutional officer, a legislator, or the OLA. But we're expanding that in this definition, specifically targeting fraud and misuse, to also include a governmental body, law enforcement, and I think there's one more. Sorry, I left my notes up in the fraud committee, so I can't remember. But there are 3 new areas: governmental body, legislator, and law enforcement. Law enforcement is the big piece.
Somebody called me up and wanted to report something, and I did a story on it. They're not protected?
No, journalist is not covered. They could report to a government agency, so I would certainly encourage you to tell them to contact a legislator, law enforcement, a government agency, a governmental body. Yes.
Given all the investigations that are done by media into a lot of these things, I would think you might want to include that.
Certainly, it's something I'd be happy to look at.
Sorry, legislator is also newly added, or that was in the statute?
Legislator was in the statute already.
So what would be a governmental body that's not agent, governor, or
So if they were,
council, or a,
yeah, so if they were like testifying at a committee, for example.
that would be the government?
Yes.
A governmental body, okay.
Representative Nash.
Yes.
Can you talk with anybody about like feasibility of those essentially reports, how they're feeling about that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The OLA actually assisted me in drafting the language and is supportive of this effort. Once again, she worked with me over the summer as I dreamt this thing up, called her, and in testimony in committee, very favorable, and actually said that this would actually help do the follow-up that they don't always have the time to do with certain state agencies. So let's we'll pick on some random agency. We'll say it's the Department of Transportation. And the OLA makes a recommendation. Sometimes that those internal controls that were recommended are not necessarily always followed up on based on time constraints of the OLA, but now that they would be gaining 2 new people to do this with the fiscal aspect of the bill, would then be able to go and proactively check in on those things, because before it would have to be at the self-reporting or self-attestation of the department saying, yep, we did those, but this is now going to give them the opportunity to go back and go through with a finer tooth comb to make sure that the things that were recommended were actually done.
Representative Robbins, you said that legislators were already included in the whistleblower protections.
Yes.
Do you know why then, in that example you gave of that employee not wanting to talk to you, they were hesitant to do so, and how could your bill change that if it was already in law?
Yes, so it's very complicated. So they can report to us about fraud, and we can then share that with law enforcement or the OLA. But legislators, under current statute, because of Chapter 13, can't receive details that would be protected under Chapter 13. So someone can report to me or our committee generally about fraud, but if they want to bring me lists of people who were overcharging in particular areas or particular situations, that is protected from legislators. So they have to go to someone who can receive the Chapter 13 data. So The current law says you can report to legislators and your job is protected, but the data you're reporting is still protected by Chapter 13. And so what my bill does specifically is it creates this new category for fraud and misuse that doesn't exist in the whistleblower statute currently. So it's just sort of transferring the things they could report on before and be protected, legislator, OLA, attorney general, constitutional officer, now into this new section we've created that deals with fraud and misuse and also includes law enforcement, government bodies, and those other things. So it's just sort of an expansion. And then it also includes unclassified state employees, so that's a big change.
Currently, without this law, what does it look like to like prosecute something like that? Say someone comes forward that would now be protected under your bill. I mean, what?
But we hope it gives people more comfort to come forward. So that we actually already have a fairly robust whistleblower protection law, but the feedback I'm getting from people in state agencies is that they still don't feel comfortable. They still want to be sure that they will be protected, especially in the unclassified and the classified. So the unclassified, who are like the managers, people who might oversee grant programs, have no protection in state law right now.
But, I mean, what would it look like to like prosecute? So, like, say someone comes forward to a committee here in the legislature, they talk about that, they're not covered under current whistleblower protections. They would be under your bill.
They would be under the bill.
But what would it look like currently, like without the bill?
So currently right, so currently classified employees are protected, and so I encourage them to come forward. Many of them still are very concerned. I mean, their livelihoods are on the line, their retirement, their pensions, so they still have concerns. So then I refer them to the OLA, who has a very robust whistleblower portal on her website. And there, she can receive even downloads of data protected by Chapter 13. And once it's referred to the OLA, or I've referred other people to go to the FBI, but then it kind of, it's lost to me as a committee chair. I don't know what's happening. But certainly there are avenues for law enforcement to pick that up and prosecute it if they find the right amount of evidence to meet the thresholds. And to your point, Sarah, about the reporting to the media, I just want to say to anyone out there that the media, thankfully in a free society, does a good job of protecting their sources. And people who have whistleblowed to the media, I don't believe have ever lost their job over that. And I know you all would respect that. So I just want to thank you for you doing your jobs and being partners in investigating the fraud. Thank you.
I know these are your bills, but are you guys also doing paid leave today, I understood? And then I thought maybe Torkelson's registering commission might be coming up, is that?
I know we're doing the one-year extension on paid family leave and look forward to that. The other one's an ag bill.
Oh, never mind, I can follow.
I was just going to ask, very broadly, sorry for the sort of TV soundbite I'm going for, but what's it been like to work with DFLers on these fraud bills in committee?
Say that again?
What's it been like to work with DFL members on these fraud bills in committee?
Well, I think what you're seeing is there's a committee face of the DFL, and then there's the walk across the street to the Centennial Office Building face of the DFL. As I'd said earlier, that a number of DFLers have said, Jim, I'd really like to vote for your bill. It seems like a common sense approach, but for some reason, I think that they've all been told that they're going to be voting no on pretty much anything that moves. And that's regrettable, because the people of Minnesota have given up a lot of taxpayer dollars that have been wasted and that have been taken by people who go and buy cars and boats and islands and shoveled it overseas. But what they're hearing from DFLers that vote no on this is that apparently they don't really seem to mind.
If I could speak to that. So in committee, our fraud committee, we've worked hard to be very bipartisan, and it definitely got spicy up there today. But generally, we have a good working relationship with our DFL colleagues. And as I said, I work closely with Chair Pinto and Chair Cleavorn on the amendment we're offering today. So I hope we get bipartisan support for it. It's in everyone's interest to stop fraud, make sure services are provided, and it's in everyone's interest to ensure that state workers are protected.
Anything else?
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.